We got the keys for how Kansas can take down Oklahoma State and get back on their winning ways on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks.
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on? Derek Johnson here. This is Locked On Jayhawks. Thanks for making it your first listen every day, and thank you to the everydayers catching each and every episode of the show. We are free and available anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe. And on today's edition, we're going to be breaking down the keys for Kansas to come away with the victory against Oklahoma State. Get back on their winning ways, get the vibes right like they should be in Lawrence with the new football stadium. So we're going to break down what it's going to take for Kansas to win the game, how they can cover the spread, because it's a pretty large spread. We'll get into FanDuel Friday later on as well, and we're going to get into our players to watch for both Kansas and Oklahoma State. Let's start right here, though. How does Kansas win this game? How does Kansas win a game in which they are favored by 3 touchdowns, right? The automatic, the easy answer when you're favored by a spread that is, that large is usually just don't mess up. Just don't screw up. Don't have dumb turnovers. Don't make stupid plays. But I don't know. It feels like with where the vibes are, even though Kansas is, 24.5 point favorites over on FanDuel, it doesn't feel like that's where the vibes are for this game. I think it more has to do with, Oklahoma State and their record and everything like that. So I think Kansas wins this game. First of all, they have to take the game seriously. And I think that can come from a couple different avenues. It's the standpoint of if losing your last 2 games by the score you did, including your rivalry game to Kansas State, when you felt like the moons were lining up to finally beat them and then you get destroyed, if that has led to a breakdown for the team, if that has led to, whether it's emotional or whatever, if that has led to some level of quit on the season, I'm not saying that's going to be the case, but I'm saying if it is, then that's where Oklahoma State comes in and gives you trouble and possibly wins this game if your head is not in it, right? And so you have to take this game seriously, both from that standpoint of making sure that you can understand that, hey, we still have things in front of us. The good news for Kansas in that avenue is that last year they very easily could have quit on the season, and they didn't. They ended up nearly making a bowl game after the bad start and won all those ranked games in a row. That gives me hope to the idea that, they're going to continue to, chop wood, so to speak, on the rest of the season and try to get it done. But they do have to take it seriously. And then it is the other element of taking it seriously in terms of you can't walk into this game thinking, oh, yeah, we're going to roll them. We're 24.5 point favorites. This is going to be easy. And I would think the humbling of the last 2 games would certainly not allow you to have that mindset in this game, but those are going to be important. You can't overlook your opponent here. Also, to win this game for Kansas, I think you have to avoid kind of an epic meltdown with turnovers and bad plays. Like, I think back to when KU beat Texas and got Charlie Strong fired back in the David Beatty era and that overtime win. I want to say Texas had 6 turnovers in that game. I think Shane Buechele threw 4 or 5 interceptions, including the one to Mike Lee in the overtime for KU. That would be the reverse footing, because this Oklahoma State team is as bad as those Kansas teams were. And when you look at it, that Texas team, I think, went 5-7 that year, which is kind of where people are projecting KU to be at this point. So that's the way they win the game. You have an ugly turnover game. And then I would say this, and this is kind of tied in with that first thing. Jalen plays back to the guy we were seeing in the first 7 games of the season. Through the first 7 games of the season, Jalen was one of the top 10, 15 quarterbacks in the country. And that's just not me, estimating. That's if you look at that point, some of the different stats, EPA per play, yards per attempt, total QBR, some of those numbers. Well, the K-State game was rough. The K-State game was ugly. The K-State game was bad. It was his worst game of the season, and it came at the worst time of the year to have your worst game of the season. The question is if he can bounce back to normal, because if he bounces back to normal against an overmatched Oklahoma State team, then you should win the game. It's hard for me to envision Jalen playing one of his good games and you losing this one when you are 24.5 point favorites. But if this is, because if you remember back to 2024, the beginning of the season was rough for Jalon Daniels, and it felt like he kind of lost his confidence early in the season and then eventually was able to gain it back and start playing well again. You just hope that the K-State game doesn't lead to, not just losing the K-State game, but leads to you losing yourself in the future games. that'll be important. But if he's back to normal, I think you'll like KU's chances to win. Now, how do they cover the spread? That would basically involve Kansas, obviously playing well overall because they're 24.5-point favorites. You really got to scoot. You really got to go if you want to cover the spread in this one. I think first of all, they can establish the run while preventing explosive runs the other way from Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State, as we kind of detailed on the preview on yesterday's show, and thank you to the everydayers who caught that one, they've been able to hit some explosive run plays. And for the KU defense, they've given up too many explosive run plays so far this season. Well, if KU can limit those, and then if Kansas can establish the run, we haven't seen Kansas really be able to establish the run at all in recent games, really since the first quarter of the season. If you can do those things, that's how you go from, hey, we're up 21 in the third quarter to ending up winning by 35 because you're running the ball and you're doing so successfully and keeping drives alive and eventually, moving into position to score points. KU needs to start getting sacks again. That's kind of a big picture thing they need to do to get back to bowl eligibility. But I think it would also be important to cover the spread if you want to limit the Oklahoma State offense, because I do think Oklahoma State, they're coming off a game in which they were just shut out versus Texas Tech. They're going to feel like they were batting with the ring, or they're going to feel like they were batting with two rings on the bat, in the warm-up circle for the Texas Tech game compared to what they're facing with the KU defense. They're getting those donuts off the bat, and they're going to be swinging fast and hard to the idea that, hey, we can score some points in this one. KU's got to get the sacks going again. They don't have any in the last couple games. You got to start pressuring the quarterback again and bringing him down. And then I would say the last thing for KU covering the spread here, if the advantages and the game itself are similar to when Kansas played West Virginia and Fresno State, where, Oklahoma State on paper is actually worse than both of those teams, but KU was able to just kind of outmatch and dominate those teams. If those advantages are similar for KU in this one, then they should be able to cover the spread. And that is one thing where it's like when Kansas has played lesser competition, they've made them look that way. And that certainly gave me hope earlier in the season because usually the best teams do that. It hasn't carried over to the bigger games for KU, though. Is there a world where KU squeaks out the Cincinnati game and maybe there's, more confidence there? Who knows? But if those things are still apparent and there for KU and they take this fully seriously, that's, I think, how they cover the spread there. Let's get to our players to watch, and then we'll finish up with a little FanDuel Friday. This is Locked on Jayhawks. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by Mazda, moving the game forward. For those who believe it's not just about playing time, it's about redefining it. These are the moments that do more than just put the points on the board. They move crowds, move culture, and they keep moving the game forward. This week's moment that moved the game forward for KU, I know it didn't feel great at the end for KU, but it certainly felt great at the beginning for KU. When they did force, I think it was Jermaine Dye who forced the fumble on the opening kick return for Kansas State, and then Kansas gets the ball to go down and score. At that moment, it was like, oh my gosh, they're going to do this. They're doing things to K-State that K-State usually does to them. Well, we don't need to go back through what happened after that. But at that moment in time, there was a brief bit of happiness. When you follow what moves you, the unexpected is only the beginning. And just like there's more to every highlight, there's more to a Mazda vehicle. Mazda, move and be moved. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked on Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. And don't forget, you can check out our KU preview on yesterday's episode. We have had a lot of KU basketball content coming at you this week too on Locked on Jayhawks, and we'll have plenty more of both of those things coming up, so make sure you are subscribed here. Our players to watch for Kansas against Oklahoma State. Let's start with the home team, the Jayhawks here, and we're going to start with the quarterback. That would be one Jalon Daniels. Now, I joke all the time that, you can pick the quarterback for players to watch for every team, every single game, and it's the easy cop-out pick to make. So I like to try to avoid it if I can because it's just so obvious. It's the most important position. But coming off his worst game of the season and now playing against a defense that has not been very good this season, KU needs Jalon to have a big game. And Jalon needs to have a big game. I mean, the going back to the confidence thing, where's the confidence going to be at after the K-State game? You think that sideline shot you saw where Jalon's doing kind of the deep breathing exercises. And I can't help but wonder, what does that do to his confidence? Well, this is about the best time on your schedule after a loss like that to have this game. Doesn't mean Kansas is going to win. Doesn't mean they're going to cover the spread, right? We went over some of the reasons what maybe would prevent that. But if you do your thing and Jalen plays his game, I think you're going to like the results in this one. And it's a good opportunity to kind of have that confidence slump buster in a way. The crazy thing for Jalen is even after that bad game against Kansas State, he still ranks top 30 nationally in total QBR. So he had a stinker, and a game before that, he was getting sacked a billion times. He's still been a top 30 quarterback by that measure in college football. So I think he will bounce back. Maybe those things haven't always happened in big games, but this isn't a big game. So, yeah, they need him to bounce back for sure. I have Daniel Hishaw on there as well. Going back to the idea that KU needs to establish the running game and start to do that better as the season goes on. Kansas just hasn't been able to establish it frequently. They've been more of a successful running team than an explosive running team. They're not getting any explosive plays. They're kind of a team where it's like, if it's blocked for 4 yards, they'll run for 4 yards. If it's blocked for 10 yards, they'll run for 4 yards. If it's blocked for 2 yards, they'll run for 2. Like, it's just not a lot of explosives there. But Hishaw had, even though his 67 rush yards against K-State were his third most of the year, you could argue it was his best rushing game when you consider the moment, the opponent, and some of the numbers that went into those stats. 6 missed tackles forced in that game. That is by far his most of the season. It was a solid yard after contact number, even despite the fact he was getting hit a bunch at the line or around the line of scrimmage. If he can continue to play like he has these last 2 games against Tech and K-State, both in games that you ended up getting blown out, but maybe in this one it matters more. I'm looking for Hishaw to have a big game. And then Lyrik Rawls is the last one for KU. Rawls on the defensive side is the safety for KU. Has had a good year for Kansas, though the last few weeks it's been a little bit of a drop-off if you're looking at things like Pro Football Focus grade, but 68 overall PFF grade this year. That's solid. 72 in coverage. That's good. He's got 50 tackles on the year, so really been able to come up and, get some action there. 5 pass deflections and interception. But what adds to the intrigue here, he's against his former team. And when Trey Lathan was playing against his former team, the KU linebacker, he had a big interception and big game overall against the Mountaineers. I'm looking for Lyrik Rawls to do the same thing here. I think that he's been solid so far this year for KU, and maybe a bit of a revenge factor or a revenge game for him in this one against the Cowboys. Our Oklahoma State players to watch. We're going to start things off with Wendell Gregory. Gregory is a defensive end. He's a redshirt freshman, was at South Carolina last year, redshirted. And so far this year, 22 tackles, 3 sacks. So, solid numbers there. He's got a 73.3 Pro Football Focus grade. So that's good. 77 in pass rush. And he has 26 total pressures. That's a really high number with 18 hurries. Feels like one of those. It felt like in all of the prime years with Mike Gundy where they were winning big games, they would always have like a good quarterback, a stud running back, a stud receiver, and a stud pass rusher. And it feels like Wendell Gregory has a chance to develop into that for Oklahoma State. He's already a good player. He's had 5 or more pressures in a game 3 times. So can KU limit him off the edge? Then you have Trip White, another SEC transfer, former Ole Miss linebacker. He's got 25 tackles this year. Solid 68 PFF grade. Wasn't somebody who was playing as much earlier in the year. He's starting to play more now. But where he's really interesting is if we go back to the idea of can KU establish the run, Trip White's been a really good run defender. He has a 77 run defense grade on Pro Football Focus. And last week against Texas Tech, that was up to an 83. He tied his season high with 47 snaps against Texas Tech. So he's starting to play more. He's playing good football, and he represents a hurdle for KU to try to run the football against. And then the last one here is the Oklahoma State running back, Rodney Fields, who missed last game with an injury. But the game before that against Cincinnati, he had 163 yards, and he's just a freshman. 420 yards on 5.5 yards per carry this year. But again, didn't play in the opener, didn't play last week against Texas Tech. He had 113 versus Tulsa. He's been kind of boom or bust, though. It's either the big games over 100 yards or he's been under 50 in every game. So he's capable of kind of taking over a rushing attack in a game or having some big runs that can, maybe change the momentum of a game. What's really amazing is he's averaging 3.7 yards after contact and has 11 runs of 10 or more yards. A very explosive runner. That's only on 75 carries. Like Hishaw out of comp has 6 runs of 10 or more yards with 2.8 yards after contact. So Fields is a really good running back for Oklahoma State and certainly one to watch. And there are player matchups here. We're going to start at the corner position for Oklahoma State with LaDainian Fields. Some of these players I've been going with Oklahoma State are players that haven't been the mainstays all season long. Obviously, they've had injuries and stuff to deal with. but it's been players that are kind of coming on for them, maybe younger guys who are getting more playing time as the season goes on for them and taking advantage and getting better. And Fields kind of continues that theme for them a little bit, but it's versus Emmanuel Henderson or whatever outside KU receiver, whether it's Levi Wentz, Bryson Canty, or whoever on the outside there at that given time. So far to this point, KU probably hasn't gotten as much out of Wentz and Canty as they were hoping for out of the portal from that duo together. Feels like with Pickett and Henderson, it's been a little up and down with what you've gotten week to week. The overall has been solid on both those guys when they've both been healthy, but it doesn't feel like you've gotten everything together at the same point in time. And it does feel like things are a little bit more like, I don't know, it's not as well-rounded of a game as maybe last year's receiving core overall. But Fields has limited snaps this year, just 113. But again, he's playing all of those snaps except for one over the last 4 games for the Cowboys. So his playing time's starting to rise. And the reason why is he's playing well. So he's earning more and more playing time. He's got an 80 Pro Football Focus grade that also has an 80 coverage grade, and so far he's allowed just 7 targets, 2 catches, no touchdowns, 1 interception, and a pass breakup. So he's been really good at limited sample size. We'll see if that continues to grow in this game, and he might be matched up with Henderson, who has over 500 receiving yards for KU this year. Then on the other side of the ball, the Oklahoma State offense against the Kansas defense, we have Jacoby Sanders. He is the right guard for Oklahoma State, going up against those KU defensive tackles, which mostly on that side, like that would be the side that DJ Withers is on specifically for KU. But also, sometimes you're working against the defensive end, which in that situation is where Justice Finkley is, right? So that's kind of an interesting matchup between those two. And then as a guard, you're sometimes getting to the second level of block, and that's where those KU linebackers are. So a lot of guys you can match up with here as a guard. But Sanders is Oklahoma State's highest rated offensive lineman. 66.3, that's a solid number. It hasn't been the best offensive line year so far for Oklahoma State. But what's interesting about Sanders is we get back to the idea of Kansas needs to get back to rushing the passer, getting sacks on the quarterback. Well, Sanders represents the best pass blocker for Oklahoma State. He has a 77 grade in pass blocking this year. He had an 89 grade in pass blocking a season before. Can the KU defensive tackles beat him? Because if they do, if you're taking out their biggest strength on the offensive line, what does that mean for the rest of your defensive line against their offensive line? Versus if they're able to win, maybe that's the start of them being able to kind of hold KU in check and preventing a big game from Dean Miller, Leroy Harris, and, some of these defensive tackles on the inside for KU, which, by the way, can we get a little more pass rush snaps from Dean Miller? I feel like he's playing outside linebacker too often. I don't know. That's just a little picking nit on that one there. Let's finish up on this episode of the show with a little FanDuel Friday. This is Locked on Jayhawks. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by DoorDash. It is almost the weekend. No, it's Friday. It is the weekend. Time to look back and crown this week's MVP on who delivered, powered by DoorDash. Just like you can win every Saturday with DoorDash streaks, saving more every time you order, these players delivered when it mattered most. Let's break it down. For Kansas, we're going to go with Blake Harrell. Had over a handful of tackles in this game. He was one of the few guys who was getting behind the line of scrimmage and at least getting close to breathing on Avery Johnson when that wasn't a very common thing for KU. And it just feels like Harrell has really soared into this portion of the season. Really feels like he's picking up his play from what already was a very high-level playoff of last year for this kid that feels like you might have a future star in this young sophomore defensive tackle who's already playing very well right now and this past week. And just like Blake Harrell delivered for Kansas, DoorDash delivers your Saturdays. With DoorDash Streaks, you save every Saturday you order, stack it up all season, and you could save up to $250, including $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday, keep the streak alive, fuel your game day, only with DoorDash. Terms apply, promo period through November 18th. This episode of the show is also brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. We're about to have our FanDuel Friday here on the show, and it is a great time of year with FanDuel because the NBA is back, NHL is going, you've got the World Series wrapping up, college football, NFL, college basketball is coming back. Everything's going on, and you can find it all over on FanDuel. Even if you missed the start of any of your games or want to ride the hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to a fourth quarter comeback. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. Right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head over to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA and the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe. And a little FanDuel Friday to finish off on your Friday here. We'll have a postcast after the game, by the way, for the KU Oklahoma State game with whatever happens. So the spread right now, at least, at time of recording, is Kansas minus 24.5. That is so many points, man. Now, there's a very real world where they cover this and then some, right? We saw how they played against West Virginia and against Fresno State. When they overmatch a team and the other team can't run the ball on them and they don't have great quarterback play, which Oklahoma State is not, Kansas kind of dominated those games. If Oklahoma State can figure anything out in the passing game, the secondary is a weakness for KU, right? So it's one of those things where it's like, you've seen the script earlier this season. The things that bring Oklahoma State back into this are the emotional side, the coming off a rivalry loss, like where's KU's head going to be at coming into the game? Those are all going to be very fair questions. So I would be avoiding the spread, honestly. Like, if anything, I don't know, the way that we've seen them play the last couple of weeks, the way we've only seen them put up, 7 points in the second half over the last 3 weeks, I would probably be leaning Oklahoma State at the 24.5. Maybe, though, knowing that with some of those second half, struggles and knowing that, see, this is the bet that I would do with Kansas. If Kansas is going to come out with their hair on fire and pissed off about how the last couple of weeks have gone and, is going to play with that emotion and everything that you need to, go out there and dominate this football game, wouldn't you think they're going to start hot? So you can get Kansas minus 6.5 on FanDuel in the first quarter spread. That would be kind of interesting to me. The first half spread is Kansas minus 13.5. So, do you think they can be up 14.5? I would almost be tempted to do that over the 24.5, because also too, think back to the Fresno State game where you just sat on it in the second half. So that would be interesting if you are a believer that Kansas is going to bounce back. I would almost be looking at that more than the 24.5. The over/under is 56.5 in this one, and that basically means the implied score from FanDuel would, be what, 40-16, something like that. I don't know. It's hard to pick an over-under because, again, going back to some of those games with West Virginia and Fresno State and UCF, if you were playing teams that didn't have a great passing game, which again Oklahoma State doesn't, KU tended to, prevent them from scoring points and lean toward the under. Against better passing teams, it's more toward the over. So maybe to that standpoint, you would say the under, right? Jalen coming off kind of a shaky game. Again, the low second half scoring for KU of late. They've got 34 points in total over their last 2 games. Maybe the under is not the worst play in the world for KU at this point in time. I'll say this, as of right now that I'm talking about this, I don't see any player props on here, but I'll be interested to see what the, where is the receiving props for KU? Because it feels like we haven't gotten a big game from receiver in a couple weeks, and maybe you can take advantage of that a little bit in one of these. And maybe Daniel Hishaw's would be a little bit lower because KU's been struggling running the football. So those would be ones that I'm kind of looking at here, but I'm definitely going to be watching this one with an observant eye, because this is kind of the fork in the road for Kansas. It's not their, at this point, your hand has been dealt with where you are. It's not where you want to be at 4-4 coming off a blowout loss to Kansas State, but it's the cards you were dealt. It's where you are right now. And the question is going to kind of just be, how do you respond? How do you respond to adversity? Can you salvage this season? Can you make it to a bowl game? Certainly you would think if Kansas is motivated from that standpoint, they're going to crush them. But, if there is a little woe is me coming off that K-State loss, then it might go the other way. So going to be very interested to see how this one goes for the Jayhawks. All right, that'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page, where you can like and subscribe to the show. See you next time with LOJ.